Welcome to Front Office Pros. I'm Steve. This is Joe. Today, we're going to be talking about our NFL free agency reaction to day one. It's been quite the frenzy, Joe. So why don't we just jump right into it because there's a lot to discuss.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack here, Steve. It was a wild day.
So at the quarterback position, started off with Kirk Cousins. He signed a 4-year, $180 million contract with $100 million guaranteed. You had Baker Mayfield. This is our free agency plus video, so we're going to be talking about some players who recently signed as well. He signed a 3-year, $100 million contract with $50 million guaranteed. Then we had Russell Wilson. He signed a 1-year minimum contract at $1.2 million. Then we had Gardner Minshew. He signed for a 2-year, $25 million contract, $15 million total guaranteed. Then we had Jacoby Brissett, a 1-year, $8 million contract, and then Mitchell Trubisky, a 2-year, $5.25 million. And that's all we got for the quarterback so far. Joe, what is your reaction to some of these quarterbacks that went off the board here? I think Kirk Cousins is the most exciting one. We were curious about where he would go. And lo and behold, he does not go to the Minnesota Vikings. He does not go back. He goes to the Falcons.
Yeah, I had in our free agency preview, I really thought Kirk was going to go to the Falcons, and he is now an Atlanta Falcon, and really thought this is a great move for him and for the Falcons. Honestly, they have a lot of young talent on the offensive side, and he brings something that they've been lacking, and really takes them over the top. And I feel like the Falcons are now the team to beat in that division.
Oh, I agree. I think they are the odds-on favorite to win that division, which is probably the weakest division. And Kirk, he is able to put the stats up. You may want to say that he doesn't show up in prime time. He did, I think, show a little bit last year, Joe. You felt like maybe he was turning a new leaf, but I feel like he could be very successful in Atlanta.
Yeah, I definitely feel that way as well. I mean, whether he wins in the playoffs or not or get there, that's another story. But yeah, I definitely like this move for the Falcons. Yes, it's a lot of money, but this was the one area of need that they had to get right and had to fix, and they definitely did that.
Then we saw Baker Mayfield go back to the Bucs. I thought they actually got a pretty good deal on him. Only an average of $33 million. I thought that was a pretty good deal for the Bucs.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was a good deal for the Bucs and Baker Mayfield, and really this was a matter of when, not if. Once they got the Mike Evans deal done.
That's true. Now, you and I are going to go back and forth a little on this. I was shocked by the Russell Wilson contract signing. You were not. I understand it to a degree because the Steelers' defense is so good that at this point, Russell Wilson's going to need that defense to be really successful. But I just felt like, will he start? Is Kenny Pickett still there? I know some people are saying, oh, no, it's definitely Russell Wilson. I don't know. I think they may have him compete for the job. I don't think it's a sure thing.
Russell Wilson does not sign there if he's got to compete. He was looking for a starting opportunity, and for him to sign so early shows me that they did give him the starting job, because I don't think he chooses to go there this early if they're saying, oh, you got to compete with Kenny Pickett. To me, in my eyes, he is their quarterback, and I thought this was the best spot for Russell Wilson. Arthur Smith in that running game, he's got 2 running backs, Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren, and the play action. I really feel like, they'll get out Russell Wilson out on some bootlegs and everything. And to me, Arthur Smith in this offense was the best situation for Russell Wilson. And then, I told you I like Pickens more just because I feel like they got a guy that's going to throw the ball down the field, and that's what Russell Wilson likes to do. And he'll definitely won't be afraid to throw some jump balls his way.
I know I can't believe that I'm actually hearing you say that you like George Pickens. I mean, that's I'm like hitting myself over the head with hearing that from you, because you've been against Pickens, but it makes sense. I mean, you saw what Cortland Sutton was able to do with him. So as far as the other guys, I don't think any of them are relevant. I mean, maybe Jacoby Brissett's a bridge guy. Trubisky, there was nobody else, so we added him in here, right? But I mean, when it comes to Minshew and Brissett, I think they're bridge guys. They could start because there really isn't a bona fide starter on the team. I mean, which one do you feel better about?
Tough to say. I mean, I think Gardner Minshew is really interesting. Obviously, we saw what he did with the Colts. Almost got them. They almost got to the playoffs. They were like a play away there. I'm curious to see. People say that this doesn't change the fact that the Raiders are going to possibly be in the mix for Justin Fields at quarterback via the trade. So I mean, that'll be interesting if that happens. But I mean, Jacoby Brissett going back to the Patriots, I feel like this was a good spot for him. And Brissett, say what you want with the guy, like he usually is able to get some wins at the quarterback position, and I feel like he's a little bit better than he may be perceived.
I'm glad you mentioned about Justin Fields, Joe, because he really is the mystery at this point. Because they've been trying to drum up some trade support. His suitors are starting to vanish. Does he maybe go to the Raiders? But kind of an odd fit because Luke Getsy, the offensive coordinator, you saw him basically in the podium. Justin Fields basically disrespect him and kind of give him a shot. So to me, it's like does that make a lot of sense? And then maybe Seahawks. I don't know. There's not a lot of teams out there. I'm almost, if I'm the Bears, if it's close, they're not going to do this. But why not keep Fields and just get a boatload for that number 1 pick?
I don't. Well, I do agree. I thought you were going to say keep Fields and then take Caleb Williams, and I was going to say there was an issue.
No. You can't. You can't do that. No.
Yeah, I do think. I mean, Ian Rappaport did tweet out saying that he felt like the Bears haven't really pursued any, trade talks because they're trying to still figure out internally if Caleb Williams is their answer or not. Whether or not that's really true from the Bears, that's another question. But it's interesting to see what Justin Fields does. Like you said, his quarterback market's kind of drying up here. Did the Vikings end up, giving a call possibly? You mentioned the Seahawks is a rumored team. I think a lot of it'll depend from the Vikings side what happens if Sam Darnold's going to pick the Broncos or the Vikings at this point.
Yeah, I think the Bears have sort of botched this whole thing, to be honest with you. But, I mean, I guess time will tell. We got to give them the benefit of the doubt. And for those who are watching, put in the comments below, where do you think Justin Fields is going to go? Where do you think is the best landing spot? Is he going to stay in Chicago? Do you think he could possibly get traded? And if he does, where is he going to go? Put in the comments below. Give us your thoughts of where you think is the best place for Justin Fields and maybe the more realistic. So, Joe, let's talk about the running backs. This was a big one today. And I got to tell you, the running back market in general has completely is going to change. It flipped on its head drastically. We're not even going to be talking about these guys, but guys like Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon, these guys are mainstays, have been there for a very long time. Both released. They're going to be free agents, added to this huge list. The biggest one here is Saquon Barkley. Going to the Eagles, Tiki Barber, basically saying, give it a shot to Saquon Barkley, saying you're dead to me. That was, I mean, honestly, I'm not that surprised by it because he did go to Penn State. He's a Pennsylvania guy, and I'll tell you this. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Barkley and Jacobs at the same time. Jacobs, for his contract, right? I mean, look at the difference here. It just goes to show, I think that I got to give credit to Barkley on this because I think Barkley and his team handled this much better. So for Jacobs, he got the 4-year, $48 million contract, right, which is an average of $12 million per year, but he only got a guarantee of $12.5. So it's potentially a 1-year, $14.8 million deal, and then the Packers could just move on. For Saquon Barkley, he signed a 3-year, $37.75 million deal, so a little over $12 million, $12.5. But then his guaranteed is $26 million. So he got a way higher percentage of guaranteed than Josh Jacobs did. I guess I think I don't know what happened there in my view, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was. I tell you what, Josh Jacobs. I was interested to see where he goes. Packers were not on my radar.
No.
They are not a team that's usually aggressive in free agency like this. We'll talk about who else they brought in later. But for them to go after and bolster this offense with a guy like Josh Jacobs, the only thing I can figure out contractually is if maybe Jacobs doesn't mind that 1-year thing, and then he's going to possibly test the market next year if the Packers do, in fact, decide to move off on him in a year. And maybe the, guarantees and the little more years was more coveted from Barkley, being that he's had his injury risk. But I mean, that's also he's a more risky signing. But the Philadelphia Eagles were aggressive and felt like it probably. I wonder if there was more competition for Saquon Barkley. You heard the Texans were interested. If the Eagles had a little bit more bidding war, so they had to give up a less favorable contract for them to Barkley.
The only thing is with Jacobs is he is 26 years old. He's young.
Right.
But Packers organizationally don't give future guaranteed money. So I think that has something to do with it from an organizational standpoint. And we saw what Aaron Jones has done. Aaron Jones has been on that team for a very long time, have continued to extend him, continue to give him money. Aaron Jones was older. I didn't think they were going to bring A.J. Dillon back. I'm with you. I was shocked of all the teams that they were talking about. We thought for sure the Texans would be one of these teams, and they don't have anybody in the running back position. Maybe it's Dameon Pierce. Maybe there's some rumors spreading it could be Mixon.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to be signed, but that's another day, another time to talk about that. But I think when it comes down to the Jacobs one's surprising to me, but I think he's going to do well in Green Bay. He's the guy. I mean, it didn't much change, honestly, from the Raiders to the Packers at this point.
No, and now he's just on a better offense with better quarterback play. I'm really excited for Josh Jacobs with the Packers and this young nucleus that they have with the offense.
I do love this for Saquon Barkley, though. DeAndre Swift's out of there. They really have nobody. I think Saquon Barkley could go absolutely nuts in Philly. The only question is they've got the tush push, which, obviously could that have some effect on how many touchdowns he's going to get. But Jason Kelce's no longer there. Was he the big reason why the tush push worked? I mean, they have Cam Jurgens that they draft. I think he'll slide over to center. But he may not be as good as Jason Kelce was, and maybe that's why the tush push was as successful.
Yeah, it definitely could play a part. I'm just curious to see the offensive line as a whole. I mean, the reason Swift was looking so good, the Philadelphia Eagles have always had a really good offensive line. You lose a guy like Jason Kelce, that's hard to replace. I know they got Cam Jurgens, expect big things out of him, but I'm curious to just, like you mentioned, the impact that losing Jason Kelce will have on this Philadelphia Eagles offense. But also be interesting if Barkley is able to actually get in the end zone and not fall down at the one like Swift was so great at setting up all those tush push touchdowns.
Well, and the thing, too, I think Barkley could have a very similar impact to what Christian McCaffrey did for the Niners. Barkley is that type of running back.
Yeah.
So, to me, this is going to be huge for the Eagles. I'm excited to see how he does there.
Yeah, I really am, too. And as far as, Tiki Barber can say what he wants. The Giants didn't even put an offer into this guy. He's been disgruntled with their organization. Big whoop he signs with the Eagles. At least he's going to have an organization that's willing to pay him.
So let's talk about the other free agents here. DeAndre Swift and Tony Pollard effectively signed the same deal. We don't know the guaranteed money yet for Pollard, but it's 3 years, $24 million for both. Swift, though, had a total guarantee of $15.3 million, which I actually thought was pretty high. That's the thing. It's more of a guarantee than Josh Jacobs got, which is kind of crazy to me, especially because Swift has been more injury prone than Josh Jacobs. Then also after that, you had Devin Singletary, Joe. I don't know what you make of this. This was kind of shocking to me. We've got a 3-year, $16.5 million contract. And then I think for Austin Eckler was around 2 years, 11.5. So I don't know what the Giants are doing. I understand there's familiarity with Devin Singletary from Brian Daboll's days back in Buffalo, but that offense was anemic as it is, and so now you're expecting Devin Singletary to come in and give this offense some juice. I don't know what's going on in New York. We're going to talk about some of the other moves they made, but this is a little bit of a head scratcher for me.
I don't hate it from the Giants' perspective. Obviously they had to bring in somebody. Swift and Pollard signed pretty early. I don't know if they were in the Josh Jacobs sweepstakes or not. But
of all the guys out there, you really think that Devin Singletary? We got Dobbins, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. there's a ton of guys out there.
Yeah, but Devin Singletary performed better than those guys that you're talking about. It doesn't have the injury risk that J.K. Dobbins has. Singletary played pretty well with the Houston Texans last year. I think it makes some sense. You mentioned the familiarity. What do we always say? Connections matter in this league.
It's all about who you know.
I think ultimately, Devin Singletary for now. Giants will probably address this position in the draft. It's not the best running back draft class, but there's talented guys in this draft. They're just going to go, later. There's no really first round picks. So I think they go the draft route too.
As far as some of these other guys, I've never been a Tony Pollard fan. You know that. I think this move makes absolutely very little sense. Pairing him up with Tyjae Spears, who was such an electric player, and they have a similar running style in my view. So I don't understand it. What do you think?
That's the confusing part to me as well. The fact that they're not like complements of each other. like a power back. You have the, Derrick Henry, then you bring in a shifty, faster guy in the receiving ability of a Tyjae Spears. Like you said, very, very similar skill sets. I was pretty confused about this move as well for the Titans.
As far as the other two moves, Austin Eckler is super intriguing. I was thinking Brian Robinson could take over, but I think Eckler might still have some juice. So I don't know what you think about how he will do. I mean, I definitely think he slowed down. He will be 29 years old, so you would think from a running back standpoint, he's about to fall off. But he's a different type of running back. He's more of a pass catcher, and they didn't really have that. And now they filled that role with Eckler.
Yeah, especially since, guy that, Antonio Gibson moved on, went to the Patriots. He was kind of that pass catcher guy. I really like the potential of a lot of dump downs. We'll see who the quarterback's going to be for the Commanders, but there's potential for some dump downs to Austin Eckler, and I think he'll benefit from, Brian Robinson will be between the tackle guy. I think Austin Eckler might benefit from not having to be both roles.
I got to tell you, it's going to be really weird to see all these guys in these different jerseys.
Yeah, it really will.
What about Swift? Thoughts on that? Yeah. I mean, it's Herbert done? What's the thought there? You've got Roschon Johnson, you've got Khalil Herbert, you bring in Swift, you pay him a decent amount of money. What do you think's happened for the Bears there?
Yeah, I mean, he joins an interesting offense, but like you mentioned, that's the only part I was a little confused by was the fact that, there's Khalil Herbert. People have been really excited about, Roschon Johnson, especially Dynasty owners, that they're now panicking with Swift coming in here. Yeah, I think if anything, it probably means I think it might impact Khalil Herbert potentially more than Roschon Johnson.
So looking at some other running backs here, you talk about Antonio Gibson. He went to the New England Patriots. Not for a lot. I thought that was a little surprising. I thought he'd get a little bit more. He's only going to be 26 years old. He got 3 years, $11.25 million. I thought he'd get more than Singletary, but I guess not. Then you had Gus Edwards. He had a 2-year, $6.5 million contract. He went to the Chargers. Zach Moss went to the Cincinnati Bengals. 2 years, $8 million for that contract. Let's hold off on the wideouts. Let's continue to talk about the running backs. This is interesting because we saw the Bengals cut Joe Mixon, which I've been telling you was going to happen. But they went ahead and decided to replace him with Moss. Did not think he'd be the guy that they'd replace him with. And I'm not really sure. I guess they have similar bruising styles. I thought it'd be more interesting if they brought in a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire. That could still happen, I suppose. But I felt like that could be more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, what is that? Maybe that just feels like the, teams around the league aren't valuing Clyde. I mean, you thought the Giants should have possibly went after him. They choose Singletary. The Bengals go Zach Moss. I mean, I think, Moss played surprisingly well for the Colts. Nobody was expecting that and him to be as relevant as he was for fantasy even. So I think this is a good landing spot for him. And we'll see what him and Chase Brown can do in that Bengals backfield now. Yeah,
I personally hate the spot for Antonio Gibson. To me, Ramondre to me is the guy. Gibson is just a secondary piece. To me, he's a good insurance policy, but I'm pretty deflated about that landing spot for him.
Yeah, but at the same time, Antonio Gibson was always just going to be a secondary piece. Even with the Commanders, that's all he really was.
True. That's true.
When people are trying to use him as a receiver and use his receiving ability. So depending on who the quarterback is, as long as they're not super scrambly and willing to throw the checkdowns, he could have some value there.
Now, I'm sure you're on the bus for the Gus Bus Edwards going over to the Chargers with Jim Harbaugh. I think that you watched, mark my words here, Blake Corum is going to be an LA Charger. I think they're going to draft this guy. There's no way they're just going to roll out with Gus Edwards. I think they're going to be drafting a rookie. I think he's a good backup. He's been a reliable backup. We've seen him in Baltimore. I just don't know if he'll be the guy.
Yeah, I don't think he'll be the guy either. Even Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, he's like to use multiple backs, had Corum, Donovan Edwards. So I'm sure he'll try to find a guy that's got some more receiving ability to pair up with Gus Edwards. But this is a running back room with the LA Chargers that needs a complete overhaul. Joshua Kelly and some of these other guys that they have just aren't that interesting. Isaiah Spiller, bringing in a guy like Gus Edwards. Harbaugh's already starting to put this imprint in, man. Gets his power back in Gus Edwards, address the tight end position with Will Dissly, and this is what Harbaugh likes to do.
Hey, you're getting ahead of yourself. We're not there yet. As far as the remaining running backs, you got Derrick Henry, you got Aaron Jones, you got Joe Mixon. Those are the headliners. Which one are you most interested in where they're going to go?
Oh, of course, it's Derrick Henry. I ultimately do think. The Ravens should not let him, not be able to get him in the building. I hear the current offer is at 6.5. I think that's a little low for him. I mean, we're seeing guys like DeAndre Swift, Tony Pollard getting 8. At least, he should be getting more than those guys. So I think once they increase their price, they might get something done there.
Yeah, we just to see what other teams are vying for his services. I don't know. We haven't
And I
really
gotta
heard a
imagine
lot
the
about
Texans are involved. I mean, I know.
Cowboys too.
Yeah, Cowboys. The freaking Jerry Jones says he wants to go all in, and yet they have done absolutely nothing. And I know Cowboy fans have to be just going absolutely nuts and like wondering where the moves are going to be coming.
Well, if you heard Rich Eisen, and I believe this fully, he said that when he was hearing about that he wanted to go all in, Jerry Jones, what he was referencing was that he was going to let Dak play out his final year of his contract.
I heard that as well.
And possibly become a free agent. That's what he meant by all in. So that means, who knows, man? Cowboys have been a mess for a while. So let's talk about the wide receivers, though, Joe. We've got Mike Evans. He decided to stick with the Bucs, which we thought would probably be the case. He ended up signing for a 2-year, $41 million contract, $35 million guaranteed. That's a ton of guaranteed money. They did not mess around there. Then you had Michael Pittman. He was on the franchise tag, ended up signing a 3-year, $70 million contract with 46 guaranteed. And then the wide receiver market has been kind of quiet. But then you had Gabriel Davis going to the Jacksonville Jaguars, a 3-year, $39 million contract with $24 million guaranteed. So what are your thoughts here on these wide receivers?
Yeah, it's interesting. The wide receiver market's pretty slow. I think that has a lot to do with the loaded wide receiver class in the draft here. And I think this market's going to move a little slowly. But it's interesting, even with that big draft class coming in, still saw, like you mentioned, Mike Evans get absolutely paid by the Buccaneers with that guaranteed money. Pittman got a pretty healthy deal to stay with the Colts. And I like that for him. I think it was a good thing for him to stay in Indianapolis. Indianapolis, he's a leader on that team, and I think it was big for them to retain him. Gabe Davis was interesting going to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Your former Bill, how are you feeling about that, Steve?
Well, I think for the amount that they paid, I think it was $13 million a year. To me, that was steep. And he's right now, I think, if memory serves me right, a top 24. I think he's the 24th highest paid receiver as far as average salary goes. So, I would have liked to have kept Gabe. I think Gabe is an underrated player. I don't know how he's going to do in Jacksonville, though. To me, this tells me that Calvin Ridley's not coming back. I think I saw someone on there. Maybe it was Jordan Schultz. I know that, but I don't know if I believe it. Do you?
I think I could because, like Calvin Ridley, he really was the best when he could play out of the slot. And I know, Zay Jones kept getting injured. They couldn't really rely on him and Kirk to stay on the outside. Well, having a bigger guy like Gabe Davis out there could allow, to keep Ridley in that slot, and that's really where he excelled. So I think it could make sense. I mean, we'll see. I don't know what his market will be. Maybe if it's not that big, maybe the Jacksonville Jaguars are able to get a decent price on him.
It sounds like, rumor had it the Patriots were going to pay him gobs of money from what we heard.
Yeah, well, we haven't seen it. If they're would be willing to pay gobs of money, I bet you that deal would have been done by now.
Yeah, for me, the Evans one, I don't have no problem with that one. For me, for that, it's like he's a Buccaneer for life. You got to pay up a little bit higher. It is what it is. The Pittman one, I think, is a little steep in my view. You don't know what this guy is going to be like with Anthony Richardson. I get what he did with Gardner Minshew, and he's a talented young player. I don't know. I just think that it was a little rich.
Well, if you believe in, they as an organization believe in Anthony Richardson, his ability to play quarterback. So you're trying to surround him with your weapons. So they obviously have confidence that Richardson will be able to get Pittman the ball.
That's fair. Let's go over to the tight end show. We've got Dalton Schultz. He came back to the Texans, which, we didn't know what was going to happen with him. He signed a 3-year, $36 million contract with $23.5 million guaranteed. Hunter Henry, you called this one, Joe, signed back with the New England Patriots on a 3-year, $27 million contract. What are your thoughts on those two guys? Those are the two headliners.
Yeah, honestly, I'm glad that both guys are back with their respective teams because I like the roles that they had, especially Dalton Schultz. I mean, he was getting utilized with C.J. Stroud, seemed to have a good connection there. And then, Hunter Henry, I knew, not surprised that their Patriots aren't going to bring back Gesicki, but Hunter Henry, played pretty well. So I felt it was pretty pivotal for them to get Hunter Henry back.
And I think I like Henry better now that Gesicki won't be coming back. I think that
Right.
was the thing. It was like, 1A, 1B. Who knows? The whole Patriots offense is in a scramble. Talking about Devontae Parker getting released. Juju really hasn't done anything. They signed Bourne, but he came off, I think, on an ACL. The Patriots offense is just a mess. So, Hunter Henry, it's for them probably some sort of continuity. With Dalton Schultz, I really like the re-sign. The Texans have so much money. Like what, like they have no excuse not to bring this guy back.
Yeah.
I had my doubts, but obviously C.J. Stroud had an unbelievable year, which led to Dalton Schultz doing really good. I thought he was just a product of the Cowboys environment because Cowboys produce tight ends, like no tomorrow.
Yeah, and look, they already got Jake Ferguson, and then who knows after that, probably Luke Schoonmaker. So Dallas Cowboys certainly know how to do that.
So other tight ends here. So Noah Fant, former Bronco, Joe, he's re-signed with the Seattle Seahawks on a 2-year, $21 million with $10.5 million per year. Colby Parkinson, this one shocked me. 3 years, $22.5 million with $7.5 per year, but $15.5 million guarantee. It's a pretty high guarantee for a guy who really hasn't done all that much. You talked about Will Dissly, Joe. Jim Harbaugh, got his tight end, blocking tight end. He went from Seattle to the Chargers, 3 years, $14 million. And then Jonnu Smith was released a little bit earlier in the offseason. He went ahead and signed with Miami, 2 years, $8.4 million with $3.9 guaranteed. So thoughts on the rest of these guys here?
Yeah, you mentioned Jonnu Smith. Dolphins got a really good deal comparing to some of these deals that they got. Jonnu Smith, just last year with the Falcons, he showed he was pretty good still. They got quite the discount there for the Dolphins. But no Fant though. He got some good money from the Seahawks to come back there. So I see why the Broncos potentially, if they were interested in bringing him back, which I see that they weren't, but they weren't going to be able to give him that type of money. Colby Parkinson. It's interesting that I feel like he showed flashes, but there was just so many tight ends on the Seahawks. I think he kind of got lost in the sauce, but PFF grades him as one of the higher run blockers. I believe he was a top 5 tight end in run blocking, and it seems like the Rams are really going to make a focal point of running the ball. They had a lot of beef on their offensive line. Really got to like this for Kyren Williams moving forward.
Yeah, it's interesting because Parkinson, he's a taller guy. He was used, I felt like, in the red zone quite a bit. I just wonder, I thought they would have moved off of Tyler Higbee by now. That to me, I think is kind of an interesting move. I wonder if he's going to be more relevant than people think. I just think there was a high amount of guarantee to give a guy, but maybe you're right. They did it primarily for the blocking.
That's what I got to imagine. He definitely has some receiving upside and red zone targets, but yeah, I think sooner than later the Rams will probably be moving off of Higbee, I'm sure.
As far as the Noah Fant contract, I'm in agreement with you. I thought that was a little bit higher than I anticipated. The guy has done. He's a name, I think, at best at this point.
Right.
I kind of wish he would have went somewhere else. It just really hasn't been used so much in Seattle. I guess if they got a different quarterback, and if it wasn't for Geno Smith, who knows? Maybe they trade for Justin Fields. I just would have liked for him to go somewhere else. I'm a little disappointed on that one, just as a fan. I just would have liked to see more out of him because I do think he's talented. I'm with you. Dolphins kind of steal Jonnu Smith based on the contract. I'm curious how they use him because they don't use the tight end. We saw that at all. So maybe they felt like they need to use him more. But honestly though, from a Dolphins standpoint, and it's going to be a hot take on my end, who really cares? The Dolphins are getting absolutely ravaged. They are losing everybody left and right. This team was considered a playoff team. This team was considered competitive. Their salary cap's out of whack, which honestly, off the top of my head, I'm like in the back of my mind, who are you spending salary cap on? I just thinking about the players they have in their roster. It's like you got Jalen Waddle on rookie contract. You've got Tua, I guess, in the 5th year. That'd be pretty high. You got Tyreek Hill. I don't know. I don't know. I feel like that the Dolphins are kind of are going to regress quite a bit next year.
Yeah, they definitely could. They're losing a ton of players, and yeah, I'm interested to see how they use John Smith as well. Because even when they had Gesicki, they still chose to use Durham Smythe because he fit the system better. So I'm curious how Mike McDaniel is going to fit John Smith and what he likes to do.
Now with Will Dissly, do you think that he is going to be like the starter, or do you think they're going to bring in another tight end because they don't really have anybody else? Gerald Everett's a free agent. I
Yeah,
guess that's not true. They have Donald Parham, and Donald Parham, was pretty good last year.
yeah, I still think they could bring in somebody else, and who knows? I think they're still possibly a candidate for maybe a Brock Bowers in the draft, or if they
Oh,
decide
definitely.
not to go offensive line. So I don't think that's out of the question. But at least for now, they've got somebody else in the tight end room, in Will Dissly.
All right, Joe. So let's head over to the edge rusher. We've been talking offense. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball. First off, we talk about Brian Burns. Remind me, Joe, what did Brian Burns? I believe it was a second round pick that the Giants sent
Second
over
and a
to get
fifth.
him. A second and a fifth. Thank you. So, second and fifth, and then he got major money.
Yeah,
Uh,
he did.
5 years, a total guarantee of 87 and a half. What was the total amount? Wasn't it 115?
I
I
believe
want to
that is
say
correct.
total.
Yeah.
115 total. And he's now the second highest paid defensive end or edge rusher in the NFL. The only one that's higher than him is Nick Bosa. So, I mean, they paid this man quite a bit. And they traded a lot for him. Let's talk about Brian Burns specifically first here. I mean, this is a monster deal for what they gave him. And then the Panthers, they could have got 2 first-round picks and they traded him a year ago. They ended up trading for a second and fifth.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a different general manager now. It's not Scott Frittier anymore. He's no longer there. Stan Morgan, although he was, I believe, in the building at the time. This is an interesting one. I like it for the Giants. I think it's going to help Kayvon Thibodeau. And they got Dexter Lawrence, too. I mean, this is going to be really strong for the Giants. For the Panthers, I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a ton of sense for the Giants. I really like this move, and I think it's good for Brian Burns as well to get away from Carolina and that organization and go to the Giants, like you said, have a guy like Kayvon Thibodeau to play opposite of. But for the Panthers, man, yeah, I mean, they've botched some deals. They botched this one, like you said. They should have traded them when they could have got a couple of first round picks. I think from the Rams, who really wanted them. That would have been better, obviously, but. I don't think it made sense for them to keep Brian Burns, though. I feel like they're kind of in a rebuild period and trying to just figure themselves out at this point. So I don't think it makes sense for them to go ahead and like spend a lot of money for Brian Burns, who by the time they're probably going to be really good, maybe out of his prime for getting the sacks and everything.
Now, do you think that? I mean, it's going to be heads or tails, right? But do you think Burns or Thibodeau will be more impactful?
It's interesting. I think maybe Burns. I don't know. I still question. Kayvon Thibodeau is so hit or miss. I still question his work ethic, and that bothers me a little bit. You know how I feel about that, and how
Boy,
it,
here
it
we
just.
go.
I mean, he seems so sporadic, man, and I can't think of anything else with him but just like taking plays off potentially. I mean, he was rumored to be a problem coming out of Oregon as well. So I think I'll go Brian Burns there.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I will mention here, Azeez Ojulari. I guess they just don't. Talk about a guy who fell off the face of the earth. At one point he was. I thought he was the Robin to Kayvon
Right.
Thibodeau, but I guess not.
Yeah, I think a lot of teams like to rotate these edge rushers. You can't have too many of them, so Ojulari could still fit in there. But yeah, as far as what they thought his ceiling could be, or what a IDP fantasy managers thought he could be, obviously it just hasn't panned out.
So Jonathan Grenard was probably the biggest shocker. I know you were a big
Yeah.
fan of his, Joe. I didn't know if he'd get 4 years, $76 million with $42 million guaranteed. Were you shocked as I was on that deal? That was massive.
I was shocked, and I was also shocked he went to the Vikings. Like I get, we'll talk about another guy that the Vikings bring in, but talking about Danielle Hunter, he's still on the market. Curious to see where he's going to end up. But it's like Gennard's not that much younger than him, and it's like why not just pay Danielle Hunter instead? They throw Gennard a bunch of money, who's just coming off of a really good year this past year with the Texans. I'm interested to see how it all pans out for him.
I'm a little surprised that the Texans, excuse me, I'm sorry, the Texans didn't pay up for this guy. They have so much cap space. I guess they just felt like it wasn't worth it. I mean, it was a lot of money.
Yeah,
What they would have had to go for him.
yeah. I just think for them, yeah, even though they have I think they still, just because you have a lot of cap space doesn't mean you shouldn't spend it not smartly. And I feel like that would have just been a potential bad decision on them to just blow a lot of money on Grenard. He's had some injury issues as well. So I was kind of surprised the Vikings were willing to throw all that money at him, honestly.
Then we had Bryce Huff. He went to the Philadelphia Eagles, 3 years, $51 million. Talk about that deal. That's an interesting one with going on with the Eagles because obviously you've heard rumors now Hassan Reddick is on the block, Josh Sweat's on the block. There's a defensive line that 2 years ago, was taking the league by storm. Brandon Graham is not getting any younger. This one's kind of a weird one for me. I don't think there's anything wrong with Reddick and Sweat. Just maybe they feel they need something different.
Yeah, I mean, I know one thing, Bryce Huff, man, he brings a lot of speed off the edge. I was kind of surprised at how much money he was able to get as well. I feel like he was a rotational guy there with the Jets, and then, Eagles are giving him a bunch of money, but he's a younger player with upside, and I think that's what the Eagles need on the defensive line.
Then we had Dorrance Armstrong. I know you're a fan of his, Joe's. He joined Dan Quinn in Washington from Dallas. 3 years, $33 million, $11 million per year. Got $22 million guaranteed. That's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, these edge rushers, man, they're getting paid a ton here this year. Teams really want to get after the quarterback, but I like this spot. I think Dorrance Armstrong getting out of Dallas, and Dallas had just so much depth on the defensive line. I feel like, Dorrance Armstrong was one of those guys who just kind of got lost, didn't get the playing time he probably liked. So going to the Commanders, like you said, reuniting with Quinn, I think this is a great spot for him.
Well, the Commanders have nobody. Chase Young, right. Montez Sweat, both gone. So, I mean, he has that opportunity to start right away.
Yeah. And I think this is an opportunity for him to make a name for himself and not be overshadowed by other people.
Then we had Zadarius Smith. He went ahead and re-signed with the Cleveland Browns, 2 years, $23.5 million. And then you had Leonard Floyd. He signed a 2-year, $20 million contract, $12 million guaranteed. Some others that we didn't have on here, but some notable names. You had Danico Autry. He's kind of a defensive end, defensive tackle combo. Signed with Houston for 2 years, $20 million. And you had Marcus Davenport. He signed a 1-year, $6.5 million prove-it deal. He did that last time, but I guess they opted to do that again. Which I was kind of surprised on. And then I want to say also we saw Andrew Van Ginkel. I think that was the other edge rusher that you were thinking about, Joe. He signed with the Vikings on a 2-year deal.
Yes, Van Ginkel was the other one I was talking about, and I guess Vikings felt like those two guys were better to have than Danielle Hunter alone.
Yeah, which I mean, Danielle Hunter is still out there, and I'd be very curious to see how much he gets. He should be getting a lot of money.
Yeah, speaking of Leonard Floyd, man, everyone was saying Danielle Hunter to the 49ers. Then all of a sudden, Leonard Floyd goes there. I don't know if this means the 49ers are out on Hunter or that's on a spot or something fell through, but just kind of curious to see the timing on that whole thing because just as everyone was saying, it was almost a definite sure thing. Hunter to the 49ers, all of a sudden it was Leonard Floyd on a 2-year deal there.
I totally missed that. I didn't even know that was a thing. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
I found Floyd going there kind of surprising. I mean, he's been a really good player. As a Bills fan, I'm going to miss him because I think he was productive, honestly, more productive than Vaughn was. So now that he goes, I mean, Chase Young, not coming back, I don't think. I don't know what's going to happen with Chase Young. He's a mystery.
Yeah, I still think he could go back to the 49ers. 49ers just love to have depth on the defensive line and at the edge position. So I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think they go big, and I think Hunter could be out of the picture for them. But Chase Young, I don't know what his market going to be. So I think if it's not that much, I think the best spot, honestly, would be best for him to return to the 49ers.
Before we head over to defensive tackles, I want to give you some time to talk about Marcus Davenport because I know you're really excited about him going to the Lions.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised that he gets another 1-year deal. I don't think he did what he wanted to do with the Minnesota Vikings and showed enough to garner more than that. But I think this was a good move for the Lions. They needed somebody opposite Aiden Hutchinson, and if Davenport's able to stay healthy and on the field, I think he should be able to have a good year in Detroit here.
So let's head over to the defensive tackles, Joe. This was some pretty monsterish deals. And this just goes to show for the defensive tackle group in general, these guys, they're stepping up their game. I mean, you're starting to see more and more money dedicated to this position. This is a position on the rise, in my view. So obviously, Chris Jones, I mean, 5 years, $158 million with $95 million guaranteed. Absolutely broke the bank. Justin Matabuki, he signed a 4-year deal with franchise tag, ended up being able to sign him long term, $98 million with $75.5 million guaranteed. Let's talk about those two guys first, because obviously they weren't a part of the free agency frenzy. These are huge moves. I mean, these guys are very impactful. I got to say, I am surprised as to how much Matabuki got. I mean, he had that 1 year that he had like 13 sacks. But besides that, he's a good run stuffer. But to get that amount of money, it was like, wow, Ravens really believe in this guy.
I was going to say, it really shows you how much the Ravens believe in him. And just I think he just does a lot for that defense that maybe goes unnoticed in a lot of that offense or the defensive line. You know, it's something to be said too. I think having a big guy like that and garner the double teams, it frees up space for the linebackers to flow down and allow a guy like Roquan Smith to come down and make plays in the backfield against running backs and help him blitzing up the A gap to get to the quarterback as well. Was a lot of money, but I think it was good for him to return to the Ravens.
Yeah, so I think the guy that I think you and I were most interested in where he was going to go, Christian Wilkins, goes to the Vegas Raiders for 4 years, $110 million with $82.75 million guaranteed. I think that was probably the most jaw-dropping contract. He's a very good player. So I think he'll produce for the Raiders, but it was like, wow, that's a payday.
Yeah, 100%. I was really blown away with the contract details as well. But yeah, this is a great fit. I mean, the Raiders really needed a guy in the interior to create that pressure and help out Max Crosby. Max Crosby really needed some help as far as somebody to take some attention away from him, and Christian Wilkins will definitely do that. And, you know, selfishly as a Broncos fan, don't exactly love that landing spot.
Well, honestly, it felt like the Raiders of old, where they
Right.
spend. I was having. I can't actually. My memory serves me right. It's not the case, but I mean, Albert Hainsworth went to the Commanders, but it almost felt like that, or Redskins at the time. It was like, whoa, like this is a lot of money. But he next to Max Crosby is going to be a lethal combination.
100%.
Yeah, I know you're not going to look forward to that as a Broncos fan.
No.
Then you had Leonard Williams. He signed back with the Seattle Seahawks. They traded a ton for this guy. I believe it was a second-round pick in order to get this guy at the deadline. So I would think that they would do everything in their power to keep him. 3 years, $64.5 million with $43.85 million guaranteed. Talk about a guy who at one point was seen as kind of a bust in New York. The Jets just didn't know how to use him, and since then he has really been able to excel.
Yeah, and I really like him going back to Seattle. Thought he really played well once he went over to the Seahawks. So happy for him, and from an IDP perspective, I'm intrigued by him, especially since he's staying in Seattle.
Well, and interesting how the defense will change up things with Mike McDonald too. I think that'll be kind of interesting if they use him, because how that's all going to work. They've got Draymond Jones, they've got Leonard Williams, they've got a couple different pass rushers, so it'll be interesting how they use all of them.
Yeah, I mean, Leonard Williams is a true defensive tackle. I think, Draymond Jones can easily kind of go over to defensive end as he's been kind of that tweener throughout his career.
So then the other guys here, Grover Stewart, he signed a 3-year, $39 million contract with $13 million per year. And Justin Jones, your guy, Joe, 3 years.
My guy.
Million. Yeah, because you think he's great. So I thought I'd include him in here. $19.75 million guaranteed. Both pretty high in my view. The thing about Grover Stewart, he had the PEDs suspension. So right. I'm surprised that the Colts decided to give him so much.
Yeah, PEDs or not, though. I mean, he's been grading out as one of the top defensive tackles against the run, and their run defense drastically suffered when he was out on suspension. So they definitely needed him to be there and help them stop the run. I feel like he's a pivotal part of that defensive line.
How about Justin Jones? How are you feeling about that signing?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I would have liked him better if he would have stayed with the Bears and just the players that are bringing to that defense, and they have such a good defense. I felt like I would have liked that fit better, but probably has a potentially more opportunity for playing time in Arizona, and obviously they put an investment in him. So, I'm curious to see how he does out in Arizona.
So going over to the linebackers, Joe. First off, we had an extension for Zaire Franklin, which I think he's really taken over for Shaq Leonard, which is kind of interesting because Shaq Leonard was supposed to be the guy for the Colts, and I want to say Zaire Franklin was a pretty late round pick, but he is really turning it around. But he had a 3-year extension for $31.2 million. And it just goes to show sometimes, for those of you who are watching who play in IDP leagues, individual defensive player, sometimes I feel like you kind of wonder whether these guys are actually good or they're just racking up tackles. You're starting to see that Zaire Franklin is actually a good player.
Yeah. And I think the Colts really showed their belief in him once they were able to move on from a Shaq Leonard. And then, obviously EJ Speed also played a part in that with him being able to play against the pass, and that's what Shaq Leonard was not being good at. But Zaire Franklin's a good player and not just a good tackler for IDP leagues.
Then we have Frankie Louvu. He went to the Washington Commanders, 3 years, $36 million, $12 million per year. Then we've got Azeez Al-Shaair going from Tennessee to Houston, reuniting with D'Amico Ryans, 3 years, $34 million, $21.5 million guaranteed. I was a little bit surprised by that. Jordan Brooks, 3 years, $26.25 million, which is around 8.7 per year. And then Blake Cashman, 3 years, 25.5, $8.5 million. And then lastly, we've got Jordan Hicks, a 2-year, $8 million. So of these guys, Joe, what stands out to you?
Yeah, well, I'll start off with Azeez Al-Shaair, man. I really like him going to the Texans, reuniting with D'Amico Ryans, as you mentioned. Here it goes to show you he took a 1-year prove-it deal last year with the Titans, had a good year, and here he is getting a multi-year deal with the Texans, and potentially better fit. I think he'll really flourish with D'Amico Ryans, but for play IDP, I'm a little, like you mentioned, off air here, nervous about how this impacts Christian Harris. I know we're both excited about him.
I love this move for Azeez Al-Shaair. Probably my favorite signing, I think, just as far as match of the player. Yeah. Because the linebacker position for the Texans, you had Denzel Perryman, you had Toto, and then you also had, Christian Harris. So I think Azeez Al-Shaair coming here could be really interesting. I really like that match.
Yeah, I like it as well.
He was a guy, even in our top 24 linebacker rankings with tiers, I don't believe I had him in there, but this would definitely change. Because I didn't know if he'd get a long-term contract. He got a 1-year prove-it deal with Tennessee. So for the Houston Texans to give him that much guaranteed and for that many years, that showed me, okay, they got a plan for this guy.
Yeah, 100%. And, I mean, D'Amico Ryans knows this guy from his San Francisco days, knows what he's about, and, no coincidence that he brings this guy in there.
So, and as far as Frankie Louvu goes, sounds like Panthers were trying to keep him. Guy who was, I believe, undrafted, kind of came out of nowhere. I think this guy could be a tackling machine over at the Commanders.
Yeah, I really think so too. I mean, he's a tackling machine with the Panthers. Like you said, kind of came out of nowhere. Started off mainly playing special teams, but he's shown out to be a good linebacker. And Commanders have really been struggling to find a stable linebacker, and I think Frankie Louvu could finally be that guy for them.
Then you got Jordan Brooks. This one's a little puzzling to me. You weren't as puzzled. I just felt like that the Dolphins, maybe they're just changing their philosophy. Obviously, Vic Fangio no longer as a defensive coordinator. They're changing their defense, but they've never really invested in the linebacker position. They've just been bringing guys like Jerome Baker back again and again and again. So for them to spend this amount of money, plus their cap situation is the worst in the league. So to get a guy like him where you could have prioritized and got some other guys, to me, that was a little bit of a puzzling part of why you elected. I would have done everything in my power to keep Christian Wilkins, not think about how I could get Jordan Brooks.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think it also goes into the fact of a possible change in philosophy to your point, but they really needed a, linebacker, and Jordan Brooks, showed he's been a really solid linebacker for the Seattle Seahawks, and I like him as a linebacker, and it definitely filled the need. But you're right. Could you criticize the Dolphins for given the money to him instead of some other guys, absolutely.
Now with the Vikings, this one's an interesting one because you had Hicks there. Hicks is no longer there. But you were thinking Ivan Pace would step up. Now they bring in a guy like Blake Cashman. They could both, I guess, coexist. I mean, what are your thoughts? Are you sort of concerned as far as that goes?
Yeah, I not gonna lie, my initial reaction, obviously, I liked Ivan Pace and what he showed. A little nervous about that, but I think him and Cashman could coexist. But obviously, you saw Pace really take off once Jordan Hicks went down with injury and stuff. But at least for Ivan Pace's sake, I'm hoping that these guys can coexist.
And I don't know what to think about from a Jordan Hicks standpoint because you had Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. They rotate their linebackers a lot. I don't know. I just he's older too.
Well, talking about Jordan Hicks, man, to the Browns, Anthony Walker leaves the Browns. I was excited
to go to Miami. Yeah,
excited for JOK, as you mentioned. Then they bring in Jordan Hicks, and I'm like, what's gonna happen? Hopefully that doesn't impact Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah that much.
Well, and then you also said Sione Takitaki. He went to New England, so the Cleveland linebacker room is kind of cleaned up a little bit. So, but Hicks hasn't been able to stay healthy either. So, JOK might be all right.
Yeah, I think he should be fine. And Anthony Walker being gone, that was a crucial thing. I'm really expecting him to step up from an IDP standpoint this year.
So heading over to the cornerbacks, Joe. We had Jalen Johnson. He went ahead and was a franchise tag player. He signed a 4-year, $76 million contract for $51.4 million guaranteed. I'm going to tell you right now, I think this is a massive mistake. This guy had one good year, and the Bears are giving him this boatload of money. I think they're going to seriously regret this contract. Corners are interesting, though, because they could pop out of nowhere and all of a sudden be good. Look at Rasul Douglas. He was a nobody from Philly, went over to Green Bay, was a really good player, and then obviously he's been good ever since. So maybe it just took a while for Jalen Johnson to develop, but I don't know, Joe. To me, I think this is a bad signing by the Bears.
Yeah, it definitely could be, but this is a defense that really came on with Eberflus's system towards the end of the year, and I think that he potentially just wanted continuity, keeps Jalen Johnson around, but I really like this for Tyreek Stevenson. We've been talking about this from an IDP standpoint, and Jalen Johnson staying there, I think, really helps Tyreek Stevenson and keep the quarterbacks not being able to stay away from one of these guys.
Then we had Carlton Davis. He got traded to the Lions. I believe the Lions traded a third-round pick, in exchange to get him. Talk about that move, Joe, because they needed a corner pretty desperately in that secondary.
Yeah, they needed to upgrade their secondary. I mean, they also brought back Emmanuel Mosley. So then they get Carlton Davis. I like this move for their secondary. And then, like I said, they upgrade their pass rush, upgrade the secondary, and these are definitely the moves that the Lions had to make to improve this defense.
Then you had Chidobe Awuzie. He signed with the Tennessee Titans, came over with Brian Callahan, who's now the head coach of the Tennessee Titans. 3 years, $36 million, $23 million guaranteed. He's going to be 29 years old. I thought that was quite a bit.
This is quite a bit, and especially guy just a couple of years ago tore his ACL, so kind of on the older spectrum for corner with injury history. But I mean, Titans are just that desperate for secondary help. I know
they are. Their secondary has been horrible this whole time, and then you saw now Sean Murphy-Bunting, who was there on a prove-it deal. He went to Arizona. Yeah. And they need a corner desperately too. Arizona, and you talk about probably two of the worst teams as far as corners go. He signed a 3-year, $25.5 million contract for $17.3 million. I feel both are overpayments.
Yeah, but I mean, they are. But I mean, you're talking about teams with a boatload of money trying to figure out where they're going to spend it, and they had needs to fill. So here we go.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true. And you had Jeff Okudah, the former first-round pick, who has been a bust, went with Atlanta, didn't really do much, now goes to Houston on a prove-it deal for 1 year, $4.75 million. Guy can't stay healthy, but it's an interesting flyer and a guy who I think could do pretty well opposite Derek Stingley.
Yeah. I mean, this guy, like you mentioned, he's had his ups and downs, but I do think it's an interesting move for the Texans, and they really needed somebody to pair opposite of Stingley there, and maybe Okudah in the DeMeco Ryans defense will do well. I think there's potential for that.
Then for safeties, Joe, because we don't have any more corners to talk about, Tyrann Mathieu, he's 31 years old, but he's coming back again for the Saints. 2 years, 13.75 million, 6.5 guaranteed. They cut Marcus May. So I guess Tyrann Mathieu is still relevant, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think it would have been curious to see like where he would have gone. I mean, the safety market is just absolutely wild. There's still a lot of safeties out there, but I like his fit and staying with the Saints. And like you said, they moved on from May, so he's definitely got a clear role there.
It's crazy how the running back and the safety market have gotten really similar. As far as it's been an undervalued position, and there's a lot of really good caliber players out there. So we got Xavier McKinney. He was the big one. He signed with the Green Bay Packers, 4 years, $68 million. Then you had Darnell Savage going from Green Bay to the Jaguars for 3 years, $21.75 million, 12.5 guaranteed. Brandon Jones, your Broncos, Joe. They went ahead and signed a good old Brandon Jones from Miami Dolphins. That was interesting, Joe. I didn't know what to think about that one. 3 years, $20 million. Then you had Kevin Byard. He signed with the Chicago Bears, 2 years, $15 million. And then safety Geno Stone. He went to the Cincinnati Bengals, 2 years, $14 million. Had a ton of interceptions this year. And then Alohi Gilman went ahead and re-signed with the Chargers, 2 years, $11 million. Let's see. What do you think about some of these guys, Joe? Some big names here. I tripped up on Brandon Jones. I went on repeat there because I guess I'm on my mind, but he's probably on your mind.
Yeah, from a Broncos perspective, I mean, this was a solid move to bring him in, and they bring back PJ Locke as well. So essentially, they got two guys for cheaper than what they were paying Justin Simmons. So they get the two for the price of one, basically. And Brandon Jones provides a lot of versatility, especially with the blitz game. That was something that he did pretty well with the Dolphins and getting after the quarterback. He had a lot of pressures coming from the safety position. So I think Vance Joseph will be able to move this guy around and figure that out. But the guy most interesting, I mean, Xavier McKinney, he was the younger safety on the market here. And this was what I'm saying, the surprise. Packers don't do this normally.
I know.
By spending on the free agents. And then here we go. I mean, addressing the running back position, getting in Xavier McKinney, but safety was a huge need for them.
Kind of a weird move to double down on probably the two most undervalued positions and spend as much money when you got a team who doesn't normally spend money. But I mean, McKinney's a good player. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
So I mean, I take that back. I mean, he was really good this past season. He was kind of a late bloomer, though, as far as he was a high draft pick and really took some while to become the player that he is today.
Yeah, and sometimes it takes a guy a bit and needs to be in the right system. But he bloomed late, and hey, now he's benefiting. He got a nice contract to play with the Packers, and he's going to be right there in line for a lot of playing time as well.
Darnell Savage, that was an interesting one. Obviously, you saw Rayshon Jenkins released. They decided to bring in Savage. I don't know. Maybe they just felt like it's a younger player. That one's a head scratcher for me.
I agree. And Savage, dealt with some injuries last year, had trouble staying on the field as well, where Rayshon Jenkins, he's been reliable and a productive safety. Kind of curious, why the Jaguars kind of did what they did there.
And then as far as Brandon Jones go, you talked about it. I think he's a good safety. He's a different type of safety where you can come off the blitz. The Broncos, released Justin Simmons. They really needed somebody. So it makes sense. I don't know. It doesn't make. I would be surprised if it's Brandon Jones and PJ Locke only, but maybe it is.
Yeah, I think it is that. I mean, they got some other. They got Caden Stearns, who has struggled to stay on the field. But what's interesting is PJ Locke, Caden Stearns, and Brandon Jones, all from Texas, played together at Texas. Now all on the Denver Broncos defense.
Wow, that's interesting. As far as Kevin Byard goes, I think he's lost a step. I think this is a bad move by the Bears. I think you saw that with Philadelphia. Yeah, I do, because I think that he's been a really good player in Tennessee. I just think he's truly lost a step, and they were replacing Eddie Jackson with him, and I just don't know. I think they're following the name, and he may bring veteran leadership, but I just I don't know. I think I could be wrong about that, but I'm not loving that move. And I got to be honest with you, I don't get the other two moves either. Geno Stone or Loie Gilman. The Chargers, I mean, they are in a horrible situation. We got to wait here. Something's going to happen with either Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Mike Williams, or Keenan Allen. Like, they can't continue like this. They're going to have to do something. So I understand that you bring – I mean, Gilman's probably more of a reserve piece. He was a starter. He was okay. I just I don't know. As far as cap spend goes, I just don't know if it makes sense. Then Geno Stone – You've got a guy like Dax Hill who did phenomenal. And then you have a guy like Jordan Battle coming up looking really good. Now you bring in Geno Stone, which I know he had all those picks. And it was this year that he had all those picks. But I don't know. I just that one didn't make a lot of sense to me either.
The only thing I can make sense for Geno Stone is if they move Dax Hill to play nickel. He's kind of that tweener guy that could potentially play both. And maybe they feel like Geno Stone is more of a true safety, and maybe Dax Hill plays that nickel position, which I think he could absolutely do, especially with his speed. But as far as Kevin Byard, that move was interesting to me by the Bears, like you said. I like Eddie Jackson. Think he's a pretty good safety himself, and the only thing I can think of is Kevin Byard providing more of a veteran leadership for somewhat of a younger defense for the Bears. And that's the only thing that makes sense to me as far as to wrap my head around why they chose Byard instead of Eddie Jackson there. Like you said, with the Chargers too, things are gonna come to fruition here. We're gonna find out what they're gonna do to create these cap savings, get under the cap. But I think it made sense for them to go ahead and keep Gilman.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I just felt like they could have probably used that money elsewhere. So that does it for our free agency frenzy day one reaction. Joe and I are going to be back all throughout this week. We're going to be covering all the happenings of free agency. We're just getting started. So, I mean, it came out with a bang. I was not expecting it to come this strong, but I mean, there were absolutely, I want to say there's something like 80 signings or something that happened today.
Yeah, definitely over 80. I mean, that report came out at like 5 p.m. and then there's even more than that. So pretty crazy day.
So thank you so much for watching. We'll be back again tomorrow, and until next time.